this is done. So this was my first application I showed you for the molecular dynamics simulations that were able to feed DD, and with DD we were able to compare with experiments. So that's typically what we call a multi-scale approach. Okay. So the multi-scale, you see, for me is not a big complicated code that would do all the scales. It's just information from one scale, which are transferred to the next scale and transferred and so on. This is for me what I would call a transfer of change of scale. It's more like a change of scale rather than a multi-scale. So the second example I wanted to show you, I already showed you this kind of movie previously in my lectures, but now we will go in details on that. So this was the case of nucleation. So I was interested in how are introduced the first dislocations in a material which is dislocation free initially, okay? And only DD could give me that. MD could give me that. So how can I do that? So I put a big sphere, a repulsive potential typically, on top of a set of atoms. So this was my orientation, 1 on 1 by 1. So you can on that figure out with your Thomson tetrahedra how it is located. This is FCC material. This was nickel. I use an embedded atom method, as you know now what it is. And the box size is about 17, let's say 20 nanometers per side, like that, up to 30 nanometers when I took the biggest one, which gives 1.5 million atoms. This was running on my laptop. It took something like a night for its simulation to run on the laptop, so it's quite fast. And I did that 10 years ago. I'm sure this laptop could do better now. And the indenter radius, or the big indent that I would push on it, is either 6 or 12 nanometers radius. So it's a very small one. Actually, here is a problem. Is the general problem of MD is that you always need to scale down everything. So experimentally, it's impossible to have such a small tip, the inner tip, when you have a big tip. The radius is never lower than 40 nanometers, typically. That's the minimum they could get experimentally. But here, you cannot do that because 40 nanometers would be like this. So you cannot do it. So we have to rescale down. So I agree that maybe what we observe here, it may be artificially distorted. There is maybe some discrepancy. So we have to be aware of that. There will be periodic conditions in the side, and the bottom atoms can only glide in the plane. They cannot go down. They can only glide in the plane to expand, to accommodate. Okay? So this is the simulation, and my question is when dislocation appears, and what are they? Okay? So first, let's look at the loading stage of the curve. So this is my force I applied on my big sphere versus the depth, so displacement of the sphere. So you see that you have first an elastic regime. This is total elasticity. You deform your sample elastically, and then suddenly something happened. This is called popping in nanoindentation. It means that dislocation have been introduced in your material. You have a popping. So the popping relaxes the force very quickly. And then if you go further, you have something which is no more elastic, which is more plastic. So you move your dislocations. If you unload, even at that stage, you are able to recover the initial shape. So the dislocation could disappear and you rebuild your crystal as perfect. But if you load further and you unload, you will get some permanent deformation. Okay? So this is the main things. Elastic, plastic, you can recover or you cannot recover in some case. Then, if you look at the defect, so this I showed you, maybe I can go fast now here. The defect appears in the material. I already showed you that, not at the surface. Just because this is a spherical contact. If you were dealing with a sharp, flat punch, for example, this is not the case. It will appear at the surface. Here it's appearing in the material, and very quickly you have partial, which appears, which are like that, which are partial splitting, leading and tailing partials here. And at the surface, this plot a triangular shape like this. So you have the triangular shape, which corresponds to the crystal symmetry. This is imposed by the symmetry. Although I had a sphere, the intersection with the surface is triangular. Okay, and you can use a Thomson tetrahedra. Remember that this was the one-on-one surface, so I'm like that, and this fits well with the free-fold symmetry of the one-on-one orientation. Okay, if I go in details on that, I showed you that already. I can zoom on this. And this appears like that, made of 3 planes, which is like a small twin, a triple Shockley partial. So you have a partial here, another one here, and the third one here. So here you have B is missing, here A is missing, and here C is missing. So you have a triple Shockley partial. So it's like a beginning of a twin, because you have CBA, you see ACB, and you have ACB here. So there is a mirror symmetry between the two sides. So this is a twinning, okay? You understand this twinning mechanism? Twinning is the mirror symmetry of your stacking. So this is what you have here. We clearly have a twin, a small twin. And quickly the twin decompose and form dislocations. Okay? And the dislocation were, so this is the initial defect. The initial defect was made of this thing in 1, 2, or 3 planes. It could be the 3 planes, or only 1, or only 2. This depends a lot on where is my dislocation my indentor located. So depending on the location of the indentor, I may have less loops. This is just, let's say, a numerical noise in the simulation. Now the structure at equilibrium, so this is what I showed you last time. If we go further, you can see that this transforms into loops. One is coming away here and coming back because of periodicity there. So they do interact, so it impedes that one to escape. But this one would like to move further, it could not. And if I push further, you will see that it finally detaches like that and wants to go. So you have 1, 2, 3 loops. And by mirror symmetry, you have something strange here, just because one loop is coming up and back. Okay, but this is the same loop. So those are, what are they? Now you know this. Prismatic loops, okay? Prismatic loops, and they glide on their cylinders like that, this one, and this one, which corresponds to the 3 Burgers vector, this one, and this one. Those are the prismatic loops going down on the 3 possible directions. Actually, those corresponds to the 3 slip systems which are active. This one, and this one. The 3 other Burgers vector which are here are perpendicular to the loading, so the Schmidt factor is more or less 0. So there is no reason to activate a dislocation there or there. Okay? At first order. Actually, you do see some dislocation here that may accommodate this. Those are called heel lock. You have a heel lock here, this is gliding, but it doesn't do anything because it is creating a step in the plane of the surface, so it does not accommodate any contact area or whatever. But there exists such a small loops here. But I would say that those are more introduced by the others. When they react and so on, they create this defect that create this heel loops. Okay. Now, if I increase a bit my box to avoid the periodicity artifact, you can see that indeed I have 1, 2, and 3 loops coming out, and another one set is coming out. So it looks like if the process was a continuous process. You have loops and other loops and loops. So it's like if loops were able to be emitted by the indentor many times. It's not a single shot mechanism. It's something that occurs many times. Okay. And the loops come. Of course, they cannot go out because I fixed the bottom atoms. I guess that if I would have a bigger box, maybe you could try it with a real computer, not on the laptop. I guess that you would be able to see 10 loops, for example, coming out. This is my guess. Okay. Of course, I could not on my laptop. So what I could do to check this, in place of bigger box, I put a smaller radius. So here, I put an indentor which is smaller. So it means that loops are a bit smaller. Is it correct? No, I think it's the same movie. No, it's not the same movie. The indentor is a bit smaller. And you can see the loops are smaller in size, 2 loops. They are a bit more noisy. You can see some corner effect here. They are not nice prismatic loops, just because they are so tiny, they are so small, that the size is comparable to the atomic size. So of course they are not perfect. Sometimes there is some defect on top of it. This could depend on my dynamic I compute, but it's normal. It's a noise, I would say, unavoidable noise. One also comment I want to show you here is how you can unfold a loop in the material. You have the process here. You see here? This, I like it. You saw a big partial here which is splitting. You see, you will see a big stacking fault. Here, you see this stacking fault, and it will unzip from the center. This, I love it. You see, you have a big stacking fault, so like if a single partial was escaping, but the tailing partial is not there, and then it's very large, and suddenly from the center of the stacking fault, the tail partial forms and unzip and form the real loop. This is funny. It's a nice mechanism. I will show again here. Here you see it forming the tail partial and unzipping. You see? This, I like it. And at the end, anyway, you will have 1 loop, 2 loop, 3 loops up here, and then the same mechanism occurs: 1 loop, 2 loop, okay, and 3 loops. So you see that it's a continuous process. Okay, so this is my assumption, I would say. I think I learned enough like that to say that this is a continuous process of nucleation of loops, prismatic loops, out of the structure. Yeah. Popping is So actually, experimentally, we never have one single loop. When you have the pop-in, you have thousands of loops which are emitted suddenly. You see, it's not a single one. Usually, you have more than one at a shot. Yeah, exactly. So this will create a stress drop because of the punch at the surface. We saw that the prismatic loops are interstitial. So here you have some punch corresponding to the vacancy loops on the same cylinder. So here the surface has been deformed. Since it has been deformed, it can accommodate your indentor displacement. So the force on your indentor is decreased. So the stress drop, the force drop, comes from the fact that here you have steps. Okay, so it's easy for the indentor to come in because of the interstitial coming out. Okay. Now the summary of that. If I want to use this data in DD simulations, and I will show you this tomorrow in my DD simulation where I couple DD to FEM to do nano indentation. So I need first to explain you the boundary conditions. So this is tomorrow. This is what is the scenario learned out of MD simulation. If you take your 1-1-1 orientation, so this one here, like that. If you plot the contact area with your indentor, spherical indentor, this looks like that. You put your Thomson tetrahedra, like this. Out of it, you can build the Burgers vectors, B1, B2, and B3. These are my three Burgers vectors. These Burgers vectors, I can build the prismatic loops, and they correspond to that loop. So I was looking in details in the MD simulations to look how they were, and they are exactly like this. I mean that this corner of the tetrahedra, so this side of the tetrahedra here, is the side of the prismatic loop coming here, you see. So this is the side of the prismatic loop here. This side here it corresponds to that one here. So they correspond to this edge segments and this edge segment. Okay, this edge, those are here. Okay, you can see that in 3D. And of course it is closed the symmetry way on the other side. So what does it mean? It means that here I have an interstitial loop. You see I put some blue atoms here. This is interstitials. It means that all these atoms are missing at that place. Here you have a vacancy loop here. So this is empty, okay? So it means that here you have a punch. Your surface has been deformed, has been punched like that. Here you have a hole, which is this shape, okay? You can do the same for the second loop. Second loop here you have the shape is that one here. All this has been punched along that direction, okay? And you have a third loop here. The shape is this one, which is punching the surface on all this area. Okay? So it means that here, this zone has been punched from B2, this zone here, B1, this zone, B3, and the common zone, how much has been deformed there? B1 plus B2 plus B3, which is vertical. So this is I would say if I was smart enough, and I was not, I would have guessed that this is normal. You see, it means that the dislocation were introduced just to accommodate a spherical contact. You have the spherical contact like that. You just have access to plastic steps, so the punch. So here you have B1 plus B2 plus B3, which is here. So this is B1 plus B2 plus B3, like that. So let's say like this, 1, 2, and 3, okay? Here on the side, you have only B1, which is like this. This is B1. And here on the side, you will have only B2. We say here B1 plus B2 plus B3. You see what I want to plot here? So this is the deformation if I was cutting a plane here through that zone here, for example, like that. Well, it's wrong because I cannot go through the two, but if I go that way and that way, I have B1 plus B2 plus B3, and this B2. Like this, okay? So you have some stairs which accommodate more or less, roughly, I would say, the contact with a sphere. It's not a sphere, of course. You cannot create a sphere with a single dislocation, but you have something like that which accommodate the best it could the spherical contact. You see, so that's normal. Dislocations they do what you want. Actually, you put them, they accommodate. Okay. And then in my DD simulation, I will show tomorrow. What I will do, I will not care of all the details of how those loops form. I say, okay, this I don't care. It's too tiny details and it occurs very fast, so I don't care. I will just put those loops. So in DD simulation, at the DD level, I will say, if I need to nucleate dislocation, I will put those 3 loops at this exact position in order to accommodate my contact. And in DD, I will be able to let them move and see what happens. Okay, you see? So this is what I learned from MD. I learned the shape and the position of the loop. And one more comment. Of course, the size of the loop is proportional to the contact area. The contact zone is here, and this fixed the size of the loop. So when you start with a small contact, you have small loops. When you go deeper and deeper, the loops are bigger and bigger. And I think we saw that in the movie also. If you go back here, the first loop, I think, are smaller than the next, just because of the contact area. These are small loop, and I'm sure the second one is bigger. The second here will be bigger, you see, bigger in size. So this is the same mechanism, okay? So you see, I learned a lot of things out of MD. As I said, finally it was obvious, but you have to think about that before drawing this plot. So if you don't see it, you don't believe it. So now we can believe. This is what happens, and this is what I will put in DD simulation. I have two information out of DD. The first one is, I don't use it anymore, as I said to some of your colleagues at the post, but it could be used. I said that I know when they are introduced, at which force. I have this force, so this could be also used to DD. And I know what they are. I know that those are the free loops. Okay? Those are the two information outcome from MD simulations. Is it clear? So tomorrow we will go back to that. I will go on the story at the DD scale on that, okay? But today I will stop it here. Is it okay for this? So this, where? Yes? The force was applied on the ball, yes, on the big sphere, yeah. It was like a big atom. You can assume that what I did, actually it was not an atom, I put the Lennard-Jones potentials, so a purely repulsive atom. So there was no attraction term, just the repulsive part of it. So I put a big sphere, which was only repulsive, repelling the atoms. You see, that was my assumption, just to have a perfect indentor. I didn't want to do the tip, to mesh the tip in atoms. Some people did it. You can have the tip, all this described by many atoms, and have a look at the contact zone. I think this is not useful. Not useful because you will have some interaction between the two. Some atoms could be attracted. You don't care of that, actually. In reality, this is diamond, and this is copper. So I prefer to have let's say, theoretical contact with a big atom, a big sphere, repulsive, which was pushing my dot. So this is what I did here. Okay. It can be, I would say, criticized, but this is what we did. Okay. So now it's time to go to the next scale. The next scale will be the micro scale. At the micro scale, before lunch, I wanted to show you two things. The 2D code, so the 2D dislocation dynamics code, I think some of you are using that. I heard somebody, I don't remember who, but he's using DD simulations. I hope he will agree with what I said. And then I will show you the 3D head screw model, so the code I'm using the most, so 3Ds. Before going toward the nodal code, I will give you next week, okay? So first, let's start those two here. Dislocation dynamic scale, so a bit higher in scales and space and time. So if I go to again, the world record of DD, I would say, is Bulatov and Kai, is Paradis. Paradis, and I know that most of you are using Paradis here, and everybody I'm talking to is saying they are using Paradis, so it's a big success, Paradis. And this code has been built in order to run on large number of CPUs, typically 100,000 CPU. This was the Blue Gene machine they bought. I think this was in 2008, or I don't remember, something like that, 2008. And thanks to that machine, they were able to run 1 million segments, which is huge. I cannot do that. And they were able to simulate the deformation up to 10% plastic strain, which is large, on this machine. And the size, I think, was a few microns, maybe 2 or 3 microns. So not a big simulation, but a large-scale simulation that nobody else could do in the world. This was the world record on DD. Unfortunately, I was told that now these results have been classified, because this was done at Livermore National Lab, as you may know. And then now, if they want to access the data, they need to make a lot of paperwork. And so this is why you don't see much paper on that simulation, actually. But they did it. You can believe me, they did it. So this is a big success. So what is DD simulations? So this, I want to go from the start, so that you will have a good idea of how it was thought, how it started. So you know that this started from the concept, 34, Taylor Orwani and Polanyi and Orwan. We had that, from that part, the dislocation theory. I gave you some books like Earth and Lotte, Friedel book. In that theory, you can find all the equations, including the one we used in the tutorial. You see, these simple equations are there. So from that, this was done in the 60s. We know everything about the behavior of a single dislocation, because on your paperboard, you easily can compute forces, pitch color forces, motion, velocity. You can have some rough idea for, at least for a single dislocation. It's very easy, okay? But if you go for many dislocations, it's much more complicated. So this is why people first started to do 2D simulations. And the first one I know about is done by Foreman and Makin in 66. So it's a very long time ago. I think at that time the computer could be very fun to look at. I'm sure they were working with cards. You don't know even what is a card. Even me, I saw the card, but I never used the computer with card in place of hard drive and floppy disk. It was cards, paper cards with holes inside. Have you ever seen that? Maybe you never saw that. I think now it's collector, this, you see. So the program you have to write, it was not C++ or Fortran. It was a paper card, and you put holes inside. And this is how you were programming your computer. And this is what he did. Okay, so this is another story. Okay, so I was even not born at that time. Then some people that we know much in France is Cubain, or Cubin, that you may say. Cubain and Lépinoux, they are French guys. They work together on a 2D code in the 88. You can have a look on that. So what is it? In that case, it's 2D. So 2D means that you have a 2D space. So either you say, okay, I'm looking at dislocations perpendicular to the plane, so it will be like points, and they can move perpendicularly to inside the plane like this. So it means that you see dislocation on top of it. Or Foreman and Makin took it the other way. They say my dislocation is in the plane, and I will see how a dislocation line moves in the plane with obstacles. So those are the two possibilities in 2D. You don't have more, either in the plane or perpendicular to the plane. So it's parallel or perpendicular. This is very simple simulations. I'm sure that now that you have the formula in the lecture I gave, you can write this in MATLAB. I think it will take 1 day. In 1 day programming, I'm sure you are able to create your first 2D DD simulations. You just put nodes, you compute the force due to all the other dislocations, and you move them with a viscous drag velocity, and you will see your 2D simulation running. It's very, very easy. It's a code that you can do in one day, I'm sure, in MATLAB. So very simple. So since it is simple, you can reach large deformation compared to the 3D simulation. It's very nice for that. And then you can have access to the cell formation, how dislocation merge and form cells, that we have very much difficulty to do with 3D simulations. But things are missing. It's 2D, it's not 3D. It's 2D, it's not 3D, and this is a big problem. I don't know if I have one. Yeah. 2D is not 3D. So what I don't like in that, and I will ask you a question, is if I say, okay, my simulation in 2D will be like this. This is my box, periodic or whatever. I put a dislocation here on such a family of subsystems, for example. So I put dislocation. This is a dislocation source. So it means that the source was somewhere here. It emits a dislocation. So it means that my loading is like that. Okay, I'm loading my sample that way. Okay. It means that this is an edge dislocation, typically in this plot. Now, if I want to, because if I have a single system, it's not funny. Okay, they are moving. The best is when you have a second slip system active also. So if you put a second slip system, if I want to activate the same way, here it's perpendicular, so it's 0. But anyway, let's say that this is like that. Another source here. So it means that this is also an edge dislocation moving in the plane. But in reality, look at your Thomson tetrahedra. This is an FCC. Can you tell me which edges are parallel? On two different systems, is there any edge which are parallel? Edge, I remember, is the perpendicular to this. Look in your Thomson tetrahedra, which edge segments could be parallel. You won't find any. It's impossible to have this parallel to another one. There is never the possibility to have two edge segments parallel. So it means that here, when you do that, something is wrong, because in reality, if you have one edge here and one edge there, there is an angle. And here, you will assume that they are like that. And this is not good. Okay, so this, at least for the local interaction, will make artifact. So this is a problem, okay, for that. Nevertheless, I tell you, it's very much useful, and I will show you an example in the next slide, what is done today. Today, still, 2D simulations are still used, and they have to be, because they can give a lot of very interesting results. I just want to highlight the 3D. When does it started, the 3D simulations? So the 3D simulation started again with Cubain. Cubain was here for the 2D. Cubain retired 2 or 3 years ago, by the way. He's still alive. He's in France, but he's retired now. So he did that in 3D, and the guy who wrote the code was Canova, Gilles Canova. He was my supervisor, actually. So Gilles Canova was my supervisor, and they wrote with Cubain and Brechet. Brechet is the third guy. The first code in 91. So this is the first 3D code that was what we call the edge screw model that I will show you today. This fully incorporates the 3D nature of the dislocations. This was in 91. And nowadays, if you look what happens in the world, there is much, I said 8, but I think now I was about to count 12. There are 12 different 3D dislocation dynamics code, different one in the world. SBIB is one of them. You have Gunim, you have Vegand, you have Huang, you have Capolongo. All those people develop their own DD code in 3D. Okay, so now you can see that there is an explosion of code just because they are very nicely located between MDA and FEM, as I said before. So from this code, the code, actually, Cubain was in Paris, Canova was in Grenoble with me, and in Grenoble we call our code 3Ds, and the code, the starting point of the code, the program is in Fortran. So it's written program, you have to give the name of the program, Micromegas. Micromegas, maybe you heard about that. Micromegas is another code, which is developed in the Cubain group now, which is available for free. It's an open source code. So this was managed by Benoît Devinck. Benoît Devinck was a PhD student of Cubain. I was a PhD of Canova. Initially, it was a single code, and now they split a bit because Paris and Grenoble, we cannot exchange every day. But they are similar. They are very much similar, and I'm sure many subroutines are still the same in the code. Okay. So Micromegas, that you can download from the website, is an open code, exactly similar to the one I will show you here. Mine is not open code, just because I am too much lazy to ensure the service, you see, to help people to debug and so on. I cannot do that. I'm already too busy. So if I put on the web an open code, then everybody will phone me. Hey, when I want to do that, no, don't do that. So if you want it, you just come to me. You spend a couple of weeks with me. I will explain you how to use it, and you go back home with the code. I can give it to you for free, for sure, but it will not be downloadable on the internet. Okay, because I'm not a phone machine. Okay, so that's the only reason, but it's not protected, I would say. Okay. Okay, so this is how it works. So now let's go to 2D before going to 3D. So here I put some names. I don't know why. This slide, I think, is an extra slide. But Cubain, Canova, Brechet, Schwartz. Schwartz also developed a very nice code. Klaus Schwartz from IBM. SBIB, Gunim, Bulatov, Weygand. So all those are 3D codes. So here was the plot I told you. So either you look at like this or like that. Let's go to the 2D, a little bit more on that. So it's easy to program. It's fast to compute. I told you this, but something is missing. So because something is missing, some smart people said, okay, let's go for what we call 2.5D. So it's not 3D, but it's not 2D. So it's 2.5D. So 2.5D means that they say, okay, I know that this is wrong, so I will correct a little bit the dislocation interaction so that it will mimic a junction. Sometimes this could create a junction, so I will put in some cases, the fact that you may have formed a Lohr-Cottrell log between the two, so I put some extra stress there. And this extra stress has been fit out of some tensile experiment, typically. Then the same for the line tension. I say, okay, this is not like that. In reality, this is a loop, like this, okay, in the sample. So there is a line tension back, so I will put some back force on my dislocation to mimic the line tension that I do not have in my 2D code. So they put that also in the code. Okay, the Franklin mechanism, they put, all this thing is done. So Franklin mechanism means that there is a critical stress to emit dislocations at your source, so this depends on the length of your source. So this is a parameter in the 2D simulation. Although you don't have the length, they put this as a parameter. Okay? And so I think I didn't write the name, I should write it. I will change that in the PDF. The most well-known, most famous guy who worked on 2D simulation, whose name do you think about? Who worked on 2D simulation here? The most, yes. Who do you know who did that the most? So I mean it's now, but before him. Van der Geeson, exactly. So I just realized that I didn't put his name. I should put his name, definitely. He was the first guy to do a lot of simulation in 2D. Erik van der Geeson from Netherlands. Okay. He's a very nice person. And he developed all the coupling that we now use in 3D. He thought about that with Alan Needleman in USA. So they are the pioneer of this study. Okay, so I should put his name. I will change that to put his name because we should think about him. And nowadays, Amin Benzerga from US is doing the most active part of the 2.5 D simulation. And it's typically the case for Klein. Here he was looking at the effect of high temperature deformation in the material. Here he computed the vacancy concentration, so you see that he is able to compute a heterogeneous value of vacancy. This is the plasticity induced by the dislocation, and you can see the dislocation here in their sample. They put some like big dark holes, and you can see the density. This I cannot do in 3D. The large scale simulation they reach here is a lot higher than what I could get. So this is why I tell you, with these features, I think that this is very interesting tool to use. So definitely, I think I would recommend if you need to have large strain, not for any application, but for large strain, 2D is a very good tool to use. Okay. So don't go directly to 3D. Maybe sometimes the 2D is enough. And you could look at what has done Eric van der Giesen and Amin Benzerga typically to help. Okay. So let's go to the 3D now. So I will first start with my stupid 3D code, edge screw model, the oldest one in the world. So that's a kind of dinosaur, you know. So this is the dinosaur. The dinosaur is like this. So we say, okay, in reality, a dislocation is a loop like that. And I say, okay, this loop, so Gilles Canova thought about that. I will replace that by a succession of edge and screw, edge and screw, edge and screw segments. So there are, if this is my Burgers vector, this is edge, this is screw, this is edge, this is screw. Okay, so the screws are blue, the edges are red. Okay, so it's very easy. I do it like that. And why we did that? Why he decided to do that? Just because this is a screw, for example, this is my Burgers vector, this is a screw. When I move it, I just have to elongate the neighbor segments to keep the connectivity. So it's very simple in topology point of view in the computer to program. When you move your segment, you just make those to be longer, and you still have your connectivity of the line because this is a 90 degrees connection. Okay. So that was a very smart idea, and it was fine. This was the first thing. Second thing he decided is that those segments will not move in a real network, in a floating world network. This is not a floating point, the coordinates of the segments. They will move in a discrete lattice. And what is the discrete lattice? It means that the start and the end of each segment will be relying on like big atoms, like that, in atoms. But the size, the distance between two atoms is not the atomic distance, something like 10 times the atomic distance. So this you can change. Typically what I showed you for the irradiation problematic, this we decreased a lot. We decreased that to a few angstrom. So this is you decide, but it could be as big as 10 times the Burgers vectors. Why did we choose that? We chose that because we found in some experiments from Mugrabi. Mugrabi deformed highly a material. He irradiated the samples to pin the dislocation, and he looked at that in the TM. And he observed that two dislocations will never be able to be closer than 15 nanometers out of the plane, in one plane. So this is the minimum distance between two dislocations in highly deformed materials. So it means that you don't need to take care of all the details between, because this does not happen. So in our simulation, we say, okay, the minimum distance between two dislocations will be 15 nanometers in one plane. And if you put that in the 110, it gives 2.6 nanometers. Okay. Okay, like that. So this is the idea. So we have a big lattice like that, where your dislocation start or end. So this is a screw, this is an edge, like that. This is the plane. And because we are using a big lattice, we can still use elasticity. But now we know, as I told you, that even at a lower scale it works. So now this is no more a limitation. But this was the idea. Then, here you know everything. We compute pitch color force on the segment. So we compute at the middle point of the segment here. We compute a stress, which is the pitch color force, sigma b cross product with the length. This is the cross, okay, you should put a cross. Cross product with the length. I project along the glide direction. So this is what you did with the tutorial. So this is the shear. Only the stress here is coming from two parts. First is the internal stress from all the segments you have in your simulated box, and the applied stress tensor that you get here, that could be given by finite element, typically, finite element modeling. So this I will explain tomorrow. this gives you a stress. You sum up the line tension because when you move, you will elongate your segments. So this costs an energy. So you have some back stress, which is called the line tension, which wants you to come back like an elastic. So line stress correction. And finally, you remove to that value, you remove the pial force under which there is no motion. Okay? So that's simple to get the effective stress tau. And then you say the velocity is, for FCC, proportional to tau star B over B. I explained you that. This is the viscous drag velocity. If it was BCC materials, here you will have exponential with the delta G over KT, something thermally activated. This we explained already. Okay? So I said that this is a phi calculation. Now, out of that, the dislocation can move. When it moves, the length here moves at a velocity v. It will move on vdt, like that, vdt. So it will sweep that area here. That area will be L vdt. L vdt is dA, like that. This L vdt. L vdt is exactly equal to the gamma. Now the shear stress induced by this, the gamma, will be equal to B times this area divided by the volume. This is my shear stress. The shear strain, I'm sorry. The shear strain is just the, as we said previously, this is the rho 1 law. B times the area divided by the volume. B dA over V. So as soon as dislocation move, they sweep an area, they give a shear strain. The shear strain is now put into a strain tensor with this formula here. So you come from the shear strain to the matrix, okay, in 3D. And then out of that, you have the mechanical behavior because you have the stress, you have the strain. Okay, so you have your mechanical behavior out of DD. So that's simple. And it is simple because segments are perpendicular one to the other one, as I said. So now that you do that, you are able to move your segments in the box. When they move, you can have several possibilities for obstacles now, and this is the nightmare. Here, Marc Verdier in the lab was the guy who developed the obstacle. He was 1 year before me in the PhD with Gilles Canova, and he developed all these features of the obstacle search and things. This is a nightmare. It's really a nightmare. I was taking care of the boundary condition, FEM and so on. He was taking care of the obstacles, and he spent his PhD on that. Okay. So this is, if you develop your code, you will see that here you will you will spend all your time. Okay. So typically, if this is the simplest one, if it's in the same plane, if one loop is coming, another one is coming there, those two are opposite signs, they have the same Burgers vector, then you should annihilate the common part and recombine the line. That's the first thing, okay? Second thing, if you have this, not second, but if you have this now, you will be able to have the Frank-Reed mechanism. This is what I call the Picasso view of Frank-Reed source. It's a Picasso source, you know, because you say that, okay, you can put an arrow on top of it, this is going that way, this is going that way, this is going that way, here that way like this, here like this, coming down and up. So this is down, and this is up. It means that those two can annihilate, and when they annihilate, you reconstruct your dislocation that way, which is ready for another term. Okay? So this is the mechanism of Frank-Reed, is like that. This is the Picasso Frank source, is like this. So you just need this feature to have this. It's very simple. So very quickly, if you have your DD code, you can make a Frank-Reed source. It's always the test people do. Then now you need to have the out-of-plane motion. So this could be two things. I already showed you those equations, more or less. The first thing is the cross-slip probability. So this is how it's done in the computer. We compute the thermally activated law, which depends on the shear stress you want your screw dislocation on the slip system. So dislocation is here. This IS1 is a screw. The Burgers vector is here. It may want to cross-slip in order to annihilate with this guy here. Okay, they love each other. They feel that they are ready to annihilate, so they want to cross-slip and to annihilate. Okay, they are attracted. So this is the cross-slip. So to do that, we compute the probability during the flight of this dislocation segment. This is the flight. For this to happen, and this probability depends on the length of your segment, the waiting time there, and some temperature. And here you have the stress out of the plane and the mechanical macroscopic stress that we defined yesterday as the starting of the third stage, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. So here at the stage 3, we assume that there are a lot of cross-slip events occurring, so we put it here. This I don't like much, this value. So I'm now looking for a PhD student where we are investigating a better law for cross-slip. So if you are interested to work with me, I have a nice subject on fatigue, where the key parameter will be cross-slip, so we start to learn how cross-slip occurs, and then we will do fatigue simulation. Anyway, so this is for cross-slip. You can do the same for climb. So for climb, Now the question is how an edge segment can go out of the plane, like this. And then there is a glide force, and there is also the diffusion force when the vacancy comes here and make it climb. So this is what we put inside. Be careful that this, because of the diffusion coefficient, is a slow process, so the velocity here is much slower than the glide velocity, 2 order of magnitude at least lower. So it means that the time step is not compatible between the two. If you are dealing with glide, then you will not see climb. If you are dealing with climb, you don't have time to look at glide. So this is a choice, and today there's no good solution for that. But people tried, and we also tried to put both at the same time, with advantages and inconvenience. Finally, but this I will show tomorrow. If you want to have some nice simulation, for example, for nano-indentation, this is the nano-indentation simulation, you need to have boundary conditions which are enforcing your boundary conditions. For example, by finite element. Here I have a finite element mesh, and I superimpose to that. Here I have removed a part of it. So inside the element, I have my DD. DD and FEM are merged together, just to compute the real external stress here, for example, due to the contact here. When you press your sphere here you have a small stress, here you have a big stress. So this should be in the DD code. Tomorrow I will detail how we can do that in the chapter on boundary conditions. Okay? So in 3.6. So a simple example for that, I think the best I wanted to do, just to show you how the code works, is yes, so we are 15 minutes, so that's perfect. So this is the real dislocation. We should be able to do this, okay, to mimic that. This is our goal. Our goal is to be able to mimic the Frank source, multiplication, annihilation, all of these things. So just to show you that it works more or less, I can show you the code itself. I think that was better than making movies. So I will run the code in front of you so that you can have a look at what is 3D, how it works, okay? So that you will better understand the code. I think that's the best illustration I could give for that. Yes? Long range interactions are just through the stress field, long range, okay? Long range means that they are far away. I will explain later on what we do for the speed up mechanism, and this has the idea of long range and short range. But long range means that when they are like this, they feel each other because of the 1/r stress field, okay? And locally, when they are very close, just because of their internal stress field, they will rotate and form what I showed you, what I call the sausage. You see, they will superimpose the line to make the junction. You don't have a triple point and a single line for the junction. That's the problem with 3D. You will superimpose two lines. In the model, it's like that, but you will get the junction naturally. You remember, I showed you the junctions in zipping and unzipping. This was done with 3Ds, okay? So it's naturally in the code, just by the internal stresses. So here I will show you an example. So this is the one I was doing last week for a colleague of mine to illustrate the Hall patch mechanism. So you know all what is Hall patch now, because you had an exercise yesterday. So Hall patch is the size effect of a grain on the yield stress. And this is the DD code. So this is my DD code. I will make it clear like that. So here I have two things. First, you see we map the mouse. Just to show you that actually when we develop the code, we have the code, which is called 3Ds. 3Ds is running. Here I am just reading the files that I have created separately. So the files took something like 10 minutes to do, so I don't want to, no, not 10 minutes, maybe 3 minutes, but I don't run it. It's already done. And here I visualize the segments with a code like this in 3D. So we developed the code 3Ds, and I also worked a lot on this code here, which I call camera. Camera, you see I run cam. Camera is the way to analyze your data, and this is very much important actually in DD. In DD modeling, people are now able to have very nice code like Paradis and so on, but to analyze the data is very much complicated, okay? And I spent, I would say, half of my time developing this camera, this tool here. I spend a lot of time, this is my baby, actually, I love it. Every time I have a new student, he says, I'd like to do this, oh, I do it for him. So now I have many options in this. I will show you some of them, typically. So the camera is running here, you see, camera is visualizing the dislocation code. I will put it that way, here, up. And this is the 3D is here, okay. So what you have simultaneously the stress. So the stress here is sigma 1,3. So it's the shear stress I apply on my dislocation here, and it's confined inside the sphere like that. And I will show you the Hall patch law. If I look, You see the dislocation, you can see that there are edge and screw. I can remove, for example, the boundary so that you can see the front loop. You see so you can see edge screw, edge screw, edge screw. So people sometimes they say, I remember Nabarro, you know, old Nabarro. Yeah, have you heard about Nabarro? I guess. So he came to my place when I was a student, and he was laughing at me because my dislocations were squared. And said, why do you have square dislocation? I know they are not squared, they are round dislocation, round shape. You know, with this accent, as he was saying. He was from South Africa, so he had an accent. It was very funny. So I was offended, you know, so I said, okay, I should do better, and he's not happy with my dislocations. So what I did, I imagined the B key. Here I will press B. Tuk. What is B? B is just, here I plot the middle point of the segments. This is the place where I compute the force, actually. It's like if I had a nodal code, this is exactly the location where I was computed the force. The BK, and now he was happy with that. The BK is like this. So here I can make it thicker if you want. And now you have your dislocation line, which is similar to a nodal code. Now you can not tell that this is an edge screw model. This is like a nodal code. You can see that it is spanning up. So by the way, here it's a strain rate control experiment. So you have the stress increasing. The strain rate has to be, the strain by step has to be constant. So as soon as it is overcritical, you need to decrease your stress to have the same strain rate. Like this. Here the dislocation touches the boundary. You see it touches the boundary at that place. So it has to expand on the corner, like this. Now only those segments could produce plasticity, like this. So the stress could not decrease much. Up to the moment it will be totally locked at the boundary, like that, okay? And here now you need to apply more stress to activate the next, in order to get the same strain rate. So you will see the mechanism. The stress increases a lot, like this. The new dislocation will be nucleated, up, emit a new one, and go on and go on. And that way you have all the pile-up mechanism. You see? The dislocation coming up. So two loops are, so this is the pile-up. Here you have two loops. See, this was your exercise yesterday. What is the distance of the second loop when you apply when you have a pile-up? So this is just because of the internal stresses from that guy on that guy, that they do not lay at the same place. Here you apply a shear stress tau, what you see here. This guy applies back a stress which is mu b over 2 pi 1 minus nu, the distance a, and this equilibrates, and this gives you this position. When the third loop comes, you have the same mechanism occurring, like that. It will push a bit the first loop. The first loop will be a bit pushed, you will see here. It will move a little bit, slightly. It's vibrating because of the connection here, but on the computer it is not. And now you have 3 loops, then a fourth one. Okay. By the way, I can show you what the code also writes. We are at the end of this. And I go to the next and so on. So I can, like that, show you all the movie. Okay. And what do you see? How are the peak of the peak stresses? What do you see? What are they? They are increasing, continuously increasing. So this is because of the back stress. The back stress needed to move the dislocation is bigger and bigger with time because you have those back stress which is impinging the motion. So this is typically the back stress. So this is the kinematic hardening, you see. So here you have the loops coming out and so on and so on. Okay? So this is for that. Here you have many information for each pictures. You know how many segments you have. Here typically I have 1,000 segments. This is out of the box. And I have many other features which are here, density and so on. So this is something that experimentalists would dream to have in the microscope. I guess if you zoom on it, you can zoom here. I can remove this and put it as an edge screw model. If I click on it, I know what it is. This is an edge. Just clicking on the segments, I know that this is an edge moving on that with this glide number, this start, middle, end point. I have all the information of the dislocation. Okay? So typically, here I have this, and I also can compute a lot of data. Typically, this is an edge. We just saw that this is an edge. Here I will put a plane, and in the plane I will compute the stress tensor. Okay? Just to see if I am able to visualize what I gave you in the lectures. So let's do that. So here I have a stress tensor, which is let's put it R or F, R. So here, what I did is the camera is responding to all the keyboard keys, A, B, C, D, up to Z. The only thing you need to know is which key to press. And this was R because I was working with the student, and the student name was Rebecca. So Rebecca, we did that together. So this is her part of the code, I would say. So here it says, okay, you want to do a stress mapping. Which formula do you want? You have Lee formula. In the textbook, you will find it. David formula for stress tensor out of a segment. Or Chi formula, the non-singular formula. So those have been plugged in. So you select the formula you want. You can take Chi formula if you want. And now you should define the grid. So it says, okay, I know that you are using a copper. This is the 42 gigapascal, ration equation, everything is given here. So you can now create a new file to define the plane. So I say, okay, let's create a new data. And I enter the coordinate of where will be my plane. So my plane will be here. So here I know that when I click on it, it will be the middle point, which is given here. This is my middle point. This is the integer coordinate of my segment. So this value here, and this value here. So here I said the plane will be located here. Now I want to have a normal to the plane. The normal to the plane will be the orientation of the line. I want to a plane like this. Orientation of the line is given here. It's bar 1, 2, bar 1. So let's say bar 1, 2, bar 1. Okay? Then now I know my plane is like this. I still need to define what is x-axis. How do I locate it's a squared plane, so where is x? So x, I could say, this is the Burgers vector, for example. This is an edge. The Burgers vector will be x. So that I will have a plane with this is Burgers vector. My dislocation will be in the middle, and I will have the stress field. So the Burgers vector is given when I clicked on it. So it's bar 1, 0, 1. So let's put it. Bar 1, 0, and 1. Okay? And now, what size of the grid? So this is up to you. So what size of the grid? So let's do a small one. So you have an idea of the sizes here, but typically the length. This is 68. This is 68. So I would say something like the size of 200 to make it a little bit bigger. And now how many points I want to have? So let's put 200 points per side. So it will be, the computation here will be, no, I will put 100, because maybe I have already many segments at that picture. 100 points per side. And I will compute displacement and stress. So tomorrow I will show you what is displacement. And I have one more feature at the end. Okay, so this is done now. It's ready to work. And it asks me, do you want a single plane or do you want a scanning? So I can make a scanning of many planes like that to have an idea of how this stress field change in the volume. So that's an option. Here I will just put one plane. But you can put 10 planes and you will see 10 planes volume. And this is the computing. Oh, bah, voilà. What happens? Oh, because one directory was not created, so I should just create my directory sig, where I'm supposed to think the thing. I'll do it again. Don't worry, it will be fast. I move. I'm located here. Okay. I will do it at that plane. You see the plane, by the way, it's here. This is the plane we were looking at. It appears now in 3D. You see the plane in red? This is just what we defined. We defined that plane. So let's run. I don't need to enter again the plane because this has been saved. So I will save a lot of time. I will go directly to, for example, now here. This location is in the plane, and I will look at that present time. What will be the stress? So I push again A, R, Weikai formula. So I press A, and I say, okay, I will read the plane, what we said before. So this is the definition of the plane, or I can change and have a new one. So the stress has been computed. It's very fast, you see. Very fast. This has been computed. So at each point, don't forget that this I have 100 points by 100 points. I don't know how many segments, maybe 200 or 300 segments. So it's 300 times, 100 times, 100 times the calculations, and this has been done. And now it says, do you want to plot the stress? I say, okay, yes, please show me what did you compute. Of course, this has been saved, so you can use whatever you want to look at it. But you can also use it here. So you can compute, for example, a shear component of the stress. So here you have a stress tensor. I will say, okay, I want sigma n b. N is the normal to the plane, and b is bar 101. So n is 1, 1, 1. B is bar 1, 0, 1. And this is my stress tensors. Okay, here. And if I zoom a little bit, you see my stress tensor like that. So why are they so big? Maybe there are some other segments there nearby, you know. 1, 1, 1, bar 1, 0, 1. Yes, that's better. I think I did something wrong before. So here you recognize the stress field of the dislocation. You see? So my dislocation is exactly there, here, and you can see the stress contour of your dislocation line, the positive, negative. All what I gave you in the textbook is here. This is for the edge. Okay? In that small plane here, this is the stress field which is acting in that plane. Okay? So with that, you can make an analysis in bigger size zone. You can make many things like this. Okay? That you could visualize. You see the things? I will not show you the displacement because it's an edge, so it's not nice. But this is what we can get. So we can do many other things. This is another zoom out of the simulations. Okay? Because of shear stress, no. And now we are back to this, and you can do what you want. So this is your simulation. You can rotate easily your code. This is very fast. Since this program has been written in a C, in the X11 language, so very close to the computer, it's a lot faster than ParaView and all these features. This is a very fast code that this is why I still use it a lot, because I cannot do faster with all the other codes. Okay. Do you have any question on 3D? So this is just an example. You see, it's just a visualization tool, camera, plus some analysis which are inside. Typically, I have many other analysis. I can show you some of them. I can go to the last picture. So I see that here you have 2,000 pictures. So let's go to the last one. This is my last picture, okay, with all the loops inside. And from this, I can write an analysis. And this is an analysis of all the length of the segments. So I have all the length distribution of the segments in the box. All this is computed out of the data automatically, you see. I can compute dislocation density, night tensor. Night tensor, I think, is written here. You have dislocation density. The night tensor is here. Here you have your alpha. Night tensor is computed in the box. I can compute that in many small boxes to have the heterogeneities of the night tensor, just to look at strain gradient. All this is inside the camera. Camera can do all this for you, okay? So I don't have the equivalent today for NumODYSS, but I will do it for sure because we need to have these tools to analyze DD. So I wanted to highlight that. Not only you need a good code, you also need to have some good analysis tools to look at what you found out of in your code. Yes, one more thing I can show you, maybe, to show you this, but here we have a single slip system, which is not a big deal. So here you have the curve on the top. I can remove the curve. And I can plot the slip systems. This is all the possible slip systems. And with the mouse, I can remove it, right-click, or visualize it, left-click. So when you have all many slip systems, you can see who is who. You say up, okay, so you can see what are the dislocation segments and so on. So it's very easy to analyze and to visualize just by click and the mouse. Okay. So this is all the possibilities are much more important than that. If you click on help, oh mince, it's not help, it's A, like aid. Okay, if you click on A, you see all the possibilities that you can do. Those are the help menu that I can plot in a window, like that. You see, it can do all these things. There are many features that it can plot. There is also something that I call Walt Disney. It's a Disney movie. I love to do some cartoons. So it means that automatically it will make a movie for you, either of the dislocations or typically a movie of the stress field. So you have, this is how I was able to build the cubes, deforming and so on. You can compute the deformation and the stress in a cube for any pictures, all the pictures. So you have a sequence, a movie, which is built, saved, and then you can create a GIF or a VI file and so on. Okay, all this is inside. Okay? So let's go back to the story. So this is what I showed you. And just to finish, so this is the algorithm for 3Ds. I don't know why there's a black line here. So it's very simple. It's a very simple algorithm. First, we initialize, so we read a lot of input files. I think at Paradis is similar. I guess you have some configuration files to fill up. Here, where you define typically the table of all the possible vectors. Those are these vectors in the arrow here. The vectors you have in the arrow are defined in vectin, like vectin table. It's the input table of the vectors. Then sec3d is the configuration of your segments. What do you have initially in your box? And control is all the parameters of your simulation. What are you doing to that? And F is the facets, just to define the boundaries, where the dislocation stops and so on, if it's periodic or not periodic, and so on. This is all defined in F. So it's very simple, just 4 files to fill up, and that's it. Then you run it. So it computes the stress at the middle of each point. So for that, it has to compute all the internal stress, which is very long, because if you have n segments in your box, you need to compute n squared stress tensors. This is where we spend most of the time. Then you add the applied stress. It could be homogeneous or not. And we project on IS. It gives you the tau star here if you sum up with the line tension. Then we move on VDT. So it's explicit algorithm. It's not semi-implicit, it's explicit. And during the area, we look if there is an obstacle or not. And if there is an obstacle during the flying distance, we do what needs to be done. Okay? Then we save. We save every n steps, and then we update the stress. Either we monitor the stress rate, or we monitor the strain rate. The strain rate, then we say, okay, the new strain rate for the next step will be the previous one, plus, let's say, an error you did between what you wanted minus what you have created. And this is just let's say, a feedback loop, in order to have your strain rate controlled experiments. Or you have metallo-fute. Metallo-fute means what you want. You can plug in what you want as a loading, typically cyclic loading or this kind of thing. You can do it here. But again, what is important is that this is the intentional computational part. If you want to look where you spend time, most of the time is in the stress tensor, which was quite easy to make parallel, because you just divide this, it's totally fully parallel, it's easy to do. But this is to be parallel is much more complicated. How to make parallel the fact that when your dislocation reacts, you will create a new one or erase the segments. If you do that in parallel computers, then your memory is lost because you don't have the same data on each node. So this is complicated to do that. So for that, this is what we define in the code. We subdivide the volume into boxes, m boxes per side of the cube. And in the volume, first we say for the stress computation, we say, okay, the dislocation is in a box, like this. I will say this box plus the first neighbor box. This is what I call the short-range stress field. If a dislocation is here, it will have a huge stress on that one, so I need to compute that very frequently, very carefully. But if a dislocation is there, the stress field is a long-range one, so I will just compute the stress field here at the middle of the box, and I will update that one every 10 steps or 100 steps to save time. It's what we call the box method. So you have short-range and long-range stress. The long-range is updated every 10 or 100 steps, depending on your simulation, and computed only at the center of the box. Of course, you need to define the minimum box size, which depends on the velocity of your dislocations, all these things. Okay? And this is what you have for the speed up. So this is the speed up calculation. If you have 20,000 segments or 10,000 segments, depending on the number of boxes, you have some maximum of the speed up. So with 15 boxes, you are able to be 60 times faster if you have 20,000 segments. But even if you increase the number of boxes, you will lose efficiency. So you need to adapt your box number with of course, the number of segments. So actually, this has to be dynamic. The box has to be remeshed with deformation. Okay? Okay, so this was what I said. And then now for the parallel computing, how to make this parallel. We split the domain into subdomain like that, but we split to several processors. And then this, using MPI, you all know message machine interface, to communicate between the nodes. We need to define how to transfer the information at the interface. What happens between at the interface, at the common part of the nodes. I didn't detail here, but what we do is, first we do things that could be separated, and then we do the things that could not be separated at once to make it parallel. So this is not very efficient. It's not like Paradis, of course. This is not highly parallel, and typically you can see it here. Here, using up to 35 CPU, this was a long time ago, we see that there is it's not scalable model. Model is not, the scalability is not good. You should be like that. The more you go, the faster you should be. It's not the case. It is not bad, but it's not good also anyway. This is what we have. It's not a good parallel code, but the code is very fast. First, because we are dealing with integers only. We have only the integer position of the segments. And because it's a very simple law, very, very simple to connect the segments together. So by itself, the code is fast. And it's a lot faster than the nodal code. About 10 times faster. So it's so fast. By itself, it is fast. Okay? Okay. So the applications are numerous. We did a lot of applications. I didn't put all of them here. First, I will show you that in the past, we worked a lot on BCC, typically to look at the bending on the iron with Julien Chaussidon and Daniel. Then we look at the clear channel. I showed you the example this morning. So this is an old story, already 10-year-old. This was for the fatigue I will show this afternoon. I will explain that fatigue structure. You can see the PSB here and the surface steps. This afternoon you will know all about that. And then we did the same in the case of particles inside. So what happens if you put precipitates inside the same simulations? You can see that it's very much different. Ice, I already spoke about ice. Magnesium pillars that you compress and they move only on the basal system, and nano notation. So this I will speak tomorrow, and this I will speak this afternoon. Okay? And I think I will stop here. And this afternoon we can start for this example, I think, yes. Application to fatigue crack. Okay? So I will start this afternoon for this example, if you are not too tired. And we'll go slowly because I think I have something like 20 or 25, no, maybe more slides. Yes, 24 slides. So we can go slowly that afternoon. I want you to understand what is coming in fatigue. This is very important to understand how persistent slip bond forms and how extrusion forms and why the first crack will appear. Okay? So that will be the ultimate goal of this afternoon session. Okay? Do you have any question on my TD simulation? Yes? FEM?
Calculations.
Yeah, no.
Mm-hmm. Are they needed even if you have a periodic domain, or they are needed only if you have finite?
So the periodic boundary condition, usually we use it to have infinite medium, or to have something, for example, superalloys, we have something which is periodic, so we use periodic conditions. Or if you want to have the bulk behavior of a single crystal infinitely big, then we use periodic. In most of my simulations, it's never periodic because this is finite. I love to play with confined stress. As you saw, nano notation is confined. There is no periodicity here. And the fatigue also will be a grain. I'm just looking at a single grain, how it works. So some other people, like Paradis or maybe in Paris, they are more interested in a large-scale simulation in periodic. I don't do that job. I could, but I didn't have application for that. I was more looking for... Actually, as I told you, my PhD was on boundary conditions in FEM. So FEM, you don't need to be infinite, so I need to have something localized. So I prefer to work on confined plasticity, I would say. Okay? But the code can handle periodic, yes, it works. It's not a problem. It's not an issue.
And there are two problems that are parallel. One of them seems to be ideal for GPU kind of.
Yes, yeah. My last Indian PhD student last year, he did that on his laptop on GPU. I don't put it in my code, but I should put it now. I should implement what he did. Because I didn't validate what he did, so I should first validate, and if it's validated, I will put it inside. Yes, sure. And we just bought a supercomputer with 4 GPU cards inside, so this will be very, very fast. But even if you make it fast on the stress calculations, you still have this obstacle search, obstacle dealing, which will take all the time, actually. So just imagine that they are half-half. If you kill one, you just have a factor 2. So it's not a big issue. If you just solve one, you also need to solve the other one. So that's the biggest, and this is a hard point, I would say, in the simulation. The obstacle is a nightmare. Yeah.
And those calculations are using multiple?
No, there is no fast multiple method. No. Numodis is using that, but not Redis. This is just purely stupid. It was the box method, the long range and short, the long and short decomposition. I didn't put the multiple.
Multiple gives also n squared, or?
I think it's n log n, I think. Yeah. In 3D, it's n log n. Yeah. Fast multiple method. Yes? So it's not as easy as you could get with Paradis, because Paradis, you exactly have the burgers, vectors, and the length. Here to do that, you need to make an analysis for each line. If there is in vicinity another line for a given strength, you see. So it's not direct. No, I would say it's not so easy. Not so easy. Yes, but I told you the edge screw model is not good for junction because it's not a triple point and a single junction. You have two dislocations which are interacting. So you have to figure out how to look at that. Typically, you can make a zoom of the dislocation night tensor locally, and you have access to that. But it's not direct. It's not direct. Yes, yeah. That's a disadvantage compared to nodal code. Clearly, yeah. This is why we developed Numodis actually to get nice junctions. Yeah. Yes, sure, no problem. Yeah. You have access to that, and with ParaView, you will play with it next week. You will see with ParaView, you know exactly which burgers is which for each part of the line. In Numodis, it's inside. No problem. You will see that. 3Ds, no, you have to do something. I don't know. Yeah. As I told you, I was not much interested in this hardening and large-scale simulation, so I didn't develop the tools for that. But I'm sure we can think about something smart that will do it. But it's not automatic, so we need to develop a new key for a camera. It will be your own key. You will have your subroutine. But it's not a big deal. It's very easy. A big what? Yes. More or less, yes. More or less, except that the obstacle search is not the same for the nodal codes. We don't do that way. Here you see that I compute the force for everybody. So this is parallel. Then now I have all the force everywhere. So at a static point. So I take a picture, I compute the velocities, and now I will move it. When I move it, I take one segment, I move it. When I move the segments, I already take care of the junction of the things that happen. In the nodal code, in Numodis, for example, we don't do that. We move everybody, and we look at where they will interact, to put the exact position of the interaction, the real junction at that place. I don't see if you will see the difference. In my case, I take segment number 1 before segment number 2, before segment number 3. So segment number 1 will move. If segment number 2 moves, and it will react there. In Numodis, this guy will move, this guy will move, so we will check exactly where they will intersect. Numodis is much more precise. We compute the exact position of interaction. So this could be done parallel. In my case, I cannot do it parallel. This can be done parallel, and then after that parallel, we take care of what happens. So you see why the algorithm is not the same because of that. And this is why I think here we had a bad choice to say we move and then we react. I think that's what was not a good solution. But the code was so fast, we were not much interested to make it faster, but it could be improved. It could be improved, clearly, yes. Yeah. So this is the main difference I would see. And also the fast multiple method, which is used in the nodal code, which is we do not use here. So fast multiple, you know that you merge the stress field at different levels to go down. So to compute the stress from here to there, first you merge and then you split. So this is the fast multiple method. You subdivide your space in a power 2 boxes size, and you can that way, in place of having an n squared calculation, you have an n log n calculation velocity cost for the stress tensor. No, yes, it was only vertical. Yes, that's true. Correct. Yeah, yeah. We are not able to. Yeah, it was just. Yeah. Yeah. That was a choice. We did that in 2002. So if this should be reshaped now, I think we can do better. Okay. Chi formula, yes. De Witt, yes. De Witt.
Why did not you use the standard stress from the stress calculated stress value?
Yeah. So actually you should use the stress of a segment, not an infinite dislocation, a segment. So in the book, so the one I gave you was for infinite dislocations. The first slide you have it. I gave it to you. This is the Lie formula. The De Witt formula is exactly what you have in your slide. De Witt is for a segment from R1 to R2, and it was complicated. You have many times. This is the one we have. We use that one. And then for the exercise, I say, okay, let's assume it's infinite, and formulas are much simpler. That's the point. Okay. But Lie and De Witt are exactly the same. They are exactly the same, except that De Witt assumes that the segment is along the z-axis. So he said that if you have a finite segment, you say it's the stress field from the semi-infinite segments from R1 minus the one from the R2 segments here. And this gives you the finite. And if you look at the stress field given from Lie, it's exactly the same as De Witt. You just need to rotate the space and you will see that the formulas are exactly equivalent. Just they are not writing the same way. One needs to rotate in the space so that your segments come toward the z-axis and you get the Lie. If you don't get Lie, if you are in a real space, you have the De Witt formula. They are exactly the same formula, actually. Except it's two papers that we currently use. So in the code, I have the two. But now I'm using Chi formula just to avoid the core effect and to be like the other guys. So everybody's using Chi formula, which takes care of the core singularities. So this is the way Chi developed that formula. So we all use that now. Okay? Shall I stop here?